Maybe you're too young or too old to know what I'm talking about. Basically, somebody sends out an email with a subject line like, "Keep reading, do not ignore." And the message itself will contain some kind of short horror story. Something like, a schoolgirl was pushed down a well, and if you don't repost it or forward it to X amount of people, she'd come crawling out of your toilet and drag you down into the pipes. Something like that. They all typically follow a similar formula. The first time I got one of them was back in middle school. Not an email, but a Facebook post that popped up on my feed. I don't exactly remember what the story was, just that it terrified me enough at the time that I actually did repost it. Something my friends completely roasted me for after the fact. But hey, no demon girl ever came crawling out of my toilet. So, who's to say I didn't make the right call? Obviously, the entire concept of these chainmails, or scare mails, was pretty dumb and juvenile. And most of the stories were so terribly written that they would only ever work on skittish 13-year-olds. But as dumb as they were still entertaining enough to engage with back in the day. It was fun to just fuck around and pretend they were real. Core childhood memories. So this morning, I was sitting at my desk, watching YouTube while sipping coffee, my typical routine before work. Before leaving, I did a quick scan through my emails. Nothing unusual. There was an invite to a wedding, a newsletter from my old university, my boss complaining about some bullshit. But right before I was about to close my laptop, something new landed in my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize. Just one word in the subject line. Sorry. A bit weird. A bit concerning. Probably malware. I barely respond to the emails that I actually have to. Why would I bother with this? I ended up clicking on it anyway. Life had been a bit monotonous recently. Maybe this would prove to be something interesting. The message was only a few sentences long.
One night, a woman was hit by a speeding car. The driver was intoxicated and did not call the police. Instead, he dragged her bleeding body down into the sewers and left her there to die. They found her body 2 days later and brought it into the morgue, where they cleaned her up and tucked her away. But when they went to take her out 2 weeks later, she was missing, her empty body bag filled with stinking sewage. If you do not forward this to 5 others by midnight, she will be in your room tonight. She will seek vengeance. This is not a joke. You know what you did.
I think I laughed out loud after reading it. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen one of these. What a blast from the past. Albeit a bit more intense than the ones I remembered seeing as a kid. But I suppose that these things evolve over time. I was still a bit perturbed that it had been sent to my work email. But then again, I work at a pretty big company, and it probably wasn't a terribly hard thing to find. The email contained an attachment as well. A single PNG file named Her. I just figured it was going to be some AI-generated image of a demon woman, an attempt at a cheap scare in order to prolong the joke. So I decided to humor the sender by opening it up. But there was nothing there, just a plain black image. What a letdown. I didn't think about it much for the rest of the day. Work was stressful, and I had to force myself to endure a boxing class afterwards. By the time I got home, I was ready to eat dinner and just pass out. After eating, I was lying on my couch sipping wine and messaging this girl, Elisa, that I'd matched with on Hinge. I was having trouble coming up with things to talk about, so I mentioned the email. She's about the same age as me, so I figured she'd get a kick out of it, which she did. She gave me her own email and asked me to forward it to her. She wanted to see it, just curious. So I sent it over. Then I put my phone down and went to go take a shower. When I checked my phone again, she'd sent another message. Holy shit, that's terrifying. I messaged her back something like, I know, right? I'm shitting bricks just thinking about it. But she told me she wasn't joking, and that she wasn't talking about the story. Look at the image again, and turn your brightness all the way up. Look closely. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to read before going to bed, but I went ahead and did so. I opened up my email and then re-downloaded the file. Then I turned the lights off and raised the brightness on my phone as high as it would go. I stared intently at the screen. It took some squinting, but I was able to see it. Elisa was right. It was absolutely fucking terrifying. You still couldn't see much, but you could see just enough. A set of floating teeth just barely reflecting the minimal light there was. The crescent shape suggested a smile. 2 eyes hovered above. Both of them were unnaturally wide, as if they were actively being pried open by unseen hands. I immediately turned the lights back on. You know that feeling you get when you dig into your pockets and your wallet or phone isn't there? I was feeling something similar to that, but with an added layer of dread. The details just didn't add up. Was the email a joke or a genuine attempt at a scare? It was too terribly written to be serious. But if it was a joke, then why was this image the creepiest shit I'd ever seen? Elisa sent another message, saying that she'd used Lightroom to lift the exposure. Make the image as bright as possible. I stared at her second email sitting in my inbox before opening it up. And this is the point where any humor or nostalgia was completely sucked away from the situation. The image was still extremely dark, but enough details had been revealed for it to be somewhat clear that this was a woman's face. Well, kind of. More like something imitating a woman. Something extremely uncanny. It felt like my brain was trying to convince me that it was actually a mannequin. Mostly due to the paper white skin. But the longer I stared at it, the less likely that seemed to be. Because I'd never seen a mannequin with an expression like that. Something so hateful, so evil. It didn't even seem possible for any person or machine to recreate. A smile was there. Though the jaw was clenched, the teeth pressed tight together. Nostrils large, flared wide open, each one like a shotgun barrel. The eyes were owl-like, stretched out in a painful-looking way. But the brows were drawn down, skin furrowed heavily between them as if the person were actually supposed to be squinting. A contradiction of features. I don't know how else to explain it. I tried doing a reverse image search, but it came back empty. I know that's not definitive proof of anything, but I'd been hoping that at least an obscure art form would have turned up. The picture was just so odd and frightening that being able to connect it to something would have maybe settled my nerves a bit. Whoever had conjured this whole thing up was good, because it had freaked me out in a way that I really didn't like. I was standing in the kitchen just mulling it all over when somebody knocked at my door. I checked the time, seeing 10 past midnight. Weird, but alright. I checked the peephole, seeing a cop standing at my door. Even fucking weirder. I opened it, and immediately she asked me to step outside. No explanation, just this dead serious look in her eyes, as if she thought I was hiding a body somewhere. I asked her what this was all about. "Come out now," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "Just do it." Maybe I'd done something while I was blackout drunk? In any case, I obliged. As soon as we were out in the hall, the cop shut the door behind me. She gestured for me to follow her, and I did. The first question she asked me once we made it outside the parking lot was whether I lived by myself or not. I told her I lived by myself. She took a deep breath, introducing herself as Officer Viana, before explaining that she had been called over here to deal with a noise complaint. I knew who she was talking about. A guy named Sam living 3 doors down from me. Rich college kid. Annoying as fuck, but I wasn't the one who called it in. After warning him to shut the music off, she'd walked outside to leave when she looked over at the window leading to my bedroom. I live on the 1st floor and my unit's right beside the entrance. If you were about average height, you'd be able to see into it from the lot. She said that I hadn't closed my blinds and that I'd left my window open, and that the streetlights were just bright enough for her to be able to see inside. She said that she saw the outline of a figure standing by the door, completely still, as if they were waiting for somebody to enter. She said it didn't look like a doll or mannequin, that she got the sense it was something dangerous. The entire time she spoke, she had a hand on her weapon, her eyes continuously darting between me and the window. I did remember leaving the window and blinds open. It's a bad habit. But somebody would have had to break through the mesh screen in order to get in. I would have heard it. Sam's music bleeding through the walls would not have been loud enough to muffle it. Not a chance. And then I realized that I'd gone into my bedroom to reach the shower about a half an hour before she showed up. I hadn't seen anything then. But what if I just hadn't looked? Honestly, I didn't want to believe what she was telling me, because if this was true, then what the fuck was I dealing with? We were standing too far away from the building for me to be able to see anything, so I began walking over to get a look at it for myself. But Viana stopped me. "You probably don't want to see it," she told me. "For your own sake, I wouldn't recommend it." Her tone was earnest enough for me to believe her. I asked her what I was supposed to do then. She told me to just wait. She'd already called for backup, and once they arrived, they'd go ahead and enter my apartment to investigate. It didn't seem like I had any other options, so I told her all right. At this point, I'm still hanging on to skepticism, more as a coping tool than anything else. The backup arrived nearly 20 minutes ago, and they're still in my apartment. It was getting cold outside, so I'm waiting in the lobby. If anybody's wondering, no, I still haven't told them about the email. There was just no way it could have been connected. But now I don't know. I really don't. And I'm not sure what to expect from here. Right now I'm sitting in the police station. The sun's about an hour away from rising. A lot has happened. These have been the most stressful hours of my life. The cops spent nearly an hour in my apartment before coming back out. When they did, their skin was pale and their expressions were blank, detached, as if they were having trouble coming to terms with whatever it was they'd just seen. They told me that there was somebody in my room. A woman. She was standing by the door in a way that I wouldn't have noticed upon first entering. Wouldn't have noticed at all until I actually turned around to get into bed. So I asked them, where was the woman now? They told me she was still there. Still in my room. I had to process that for a moment. Then I asked them why the hell they hadn't dragged her out. They briefly glanced at each other, both looking really uncomfortable before telling me they weren't able to. As in, they actually physically couldn't do it. I shook my head and told them I wasn't following. Viana wasn't the biggest person, but the other officer who arrived looked like he could pick me up with one arm and chuck me across a field. Again, they just told me that she couldn't be moved. They'd even tried using tasers. Nothing. She didn't react, as if she were a statue fixed in place, but they were absolutely positive that she wasn't a statue. I asked them what she looked like. They asked me if I was sure I wanted to know. That they could show me, but her appearance may cause further psychological distress. I asked them to show me anyway. It was a strange thing. In the back of my mind, I had already been anticipating it. But even with the evidence presented so clearly and irrefutably before me, there was still a part of me that refused to believe it. It was the same woman from the picture. It couldn't be avoided anymore. I showed them the email and I explained everything. They asked a lot of questions. I answered with the information I had. They didn't seem to want to believe it either. It was like we'd all entered the Twilight Zone. They confirmed a few other details as well, like how a strong odor of sewage had been emanating from the woman, that it looked like she had been severely injured, one of her arms horrifically bent and twisted, scrapes and cuts all over her body. They had only shown me her picture from the shoulders up, but she'd actually been completely naked. They had already called for additional backup. Once they arrived, Viana drove me down to the police station. For my own safety, she claimed. In the car, I asked her how they planned on dealing with this, what exactly they were going to do. She said that she wasn't sure, that there really wasn't a precedent for something like this. She was pretty obviously disturbed by it all, but doing her best not to show it. She then asked me who Jackson Smith was. I told her he was a friend that I'd known since middle school. Then I asked what the hell he had to do with this. She said that he had been the one who sent me the email. that I probably hadn't noticed because he'd first forwarded it to a dummy account, which had then forwarded it to me. She asked me when was the last time I saw him. I told her a couple of weeks ago. We'd gone out drinking. He'd picked me up and parked on a residential street a few blocks away from downtown and told me he'd leave it there overnight. The night in question had been a disaster. I'd fallen into old habits and blacked out. At least, I assumed that I had. There was a lapse in my memories. 1 second we were taking tequila shots, and the next thing I knew, I was in the passenger seat of his car. I didn't know how late it was. Could have been 3 or 4 in the morning. All I had was a vague recollection of being in the car and then getting dropped off. I didn't remember anything he'd said to me or anything I'd seen. I was even too out of it to question why he was even driving at all. That's basically what I told her. She just nodded. I tried giving Jackson a call, but he wasn't picking up. I then asked some mutual friends if anybody had seen him lately. Nobody had replied until we reached the station. Craig said that he'd seen Jackson at a gas station around noon, that the guy hadn't said much and seemed pretty eager to get back on the road. Inside the police station, I asked them if there had been any reports of a body going missing from a morgue. They said that's what they were currently trying to figure out. I was then led into an interrogation room. The first detective asked me a myriad of things, to give an account of my entire day from morning to night, whether I'd seen the woman before, if I'd ever heard anybody breaking in. He then asked me if this entire thing was some prank that I may or may not have been in on. If I actually believed that the email itself caused the woman to suddenly appear in my room. Soon it became obvious that he was trying to bait me into confirming one of 2 outcomes. That I was either clinically insane, or that I'd actually kidnapped the woman. But I could tell that I wasn't giving him the answers he wanted, that he was becoming aggravated, that he really didn't even believe any of this. But I just told him what I knew, what had really happened. After about an hour, he was replaced by somebody else. This guy actually shook my hand and told me his name, Detective Brito. The first thing he told me after sitting down was that he believed everything that I'd said, that I must have been terrified and confused, and that I had his deepest sympathies. It was a refreshing thing to hear, but I could not believe they were pulling the good cop, bad cop shit. I mean, what the hell did they think I had done? Even if I had done something, why would I turn myself in? I asked Detective Brito why he was so sure that I was telling the truth, just to see what he'd say. Normally I wouldn't have been so bold with a cop, but I was starting to lose my shit. He just smiled, told me that earlier in his life, he wouldn't have believed it either. But a few years ago, he'd gone through something that had forced him to question his understanding of things. That now he was a lot more open-minded. I asked him what exactly he'd experienced. He said that he'd tell me later, that we should deal with this first. He proceeded to give me an update on the woman. The entire building has now been evacuated and the SWAT team has been called. They still haven't been able to move her. She still hasn't said a word. Every now and then she'll turn her head or body, but she always remains standing in the same exact spot beside my door. Sometimes she'll be facing ahead, and other times she'll be staring into a corner. He said that the FBI had started tracking the situation. I asked him to clarify what he meant when he said that they still haven't been able to move her. He said that this is the part that nobody's been able to make heads or tails of. Given the evidence, they have to conclude that she's completely resistant against physical force, electricity, chemicals, and pretty much anything that they're legally cleared to try. She still hasn't displayed any aggression, so they're not sure what a bullet to the head would do. He said that one option was still on the table, and it would be to cut the floor out from beneath her and then load her into a truck, but that would probably end up being extremely annoying for me. I asked him about Jackson. He told me that they were looking for him, that his vehicle's been spotted several states over, but they haven't been able to catch him. At that point, I really wasn't sure what to say anymore. I think I buried my face in my hands, screamed expletives into my palm, which Detective Brito didn't react to. I told him that I really needed to get some sleep if he wanted to get any useful information out of me. Then I suddenly thought about Elisa, remembering that I'd forwarded the email to her. I could feel a wave of guilt wash over me. I brought it up to Detective Burrito, told him that they should find out where she lives and send somebody over to check on her, just in case. He said that might be a good idea, that he'd call it in. But in the meantime, I was free to leave and that I should go get some rest, that we'd talk again in the morning. I left the station and picked up a 6-pack, then headed for a motel where I booked a room for the night. I'm exhausted on all fronts. I haven't changed clothes in nearly 24 hours, and I can feel my skin sticking to my shirt. I don't know what to think. Quite frankly, I don't want to think about anything at all. Which is where the alcohol comes in. I'm 4 deep now, and it's all starting to feel a bit less real. I know I shouldn't be using it as a crutch, but I just don't want to fucking deal with this. Before trying to get some sleep, I sent my boss a text, telling him I wouldn't be in tomorrow. And then I checked my email. Jackson had forwarded me another. This time there was no subject. All it contained was this message.
You think you're done with this, but you aren't. You think you've escaped her, but you haven't. You must pay. If you do not forward this message to 5 more people, the next time you take a shower, she will be in there with you. She will drag you down into something worse than hell. Something worse than you can imagine. You will pay.
If anything else happens, I'll update.